Immediately after he was promoted, Benedict Arnold was sent to Pennsylvania to fight with George Washington in the battles of Brandywine and Germantown. His absence at Saratoga resulted in a defensive war, as General Gates was content to end the fighting when General Burgoyne ordered a retreat. This lack of aggression resulted in a loss at Saratoga after General Burgoyne's men regained strength and defeated the American forces. After losing the Battle of Saratoga, prospective French ambassadors were unimpressed with American war prowess and deemed that the Americans could not overthrow the greater British power. General Gates' surrender at Saratoga also resulted in the loss of morale by all of the American troops. America's hopes of winning the war were quickly being diminished. General Washington surrendered in 1778 to General Cornwallis in the Battle of Yorktown because of a lack of troops and supplies. After his surrender, American colonists were forced to give up the fight for independence. Revolutionaries such as George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Gates, and Thomas Paine were tried for treason against the crown and hanged in 1780. The public execution of the very soul of the Revolution destroyed America's hope at becoming independent from Britain. The colonists lived under strict British rule until, in 1807, Britain banned the slave trade throughout its empire. Although there were uprisings in the South against this ban, the stricter enforcement of laws barred the colonists from skirting around the act and forced them to end the slave trade. In 1833, Britain issued the Slavery Abolition Act, which banned slavery throughout the British Empire. British soldiers, who were available after the end of the Napoleonic Wars, were sent to the American colonies to enforce this act. However, the South became furious at this new law, and the rebellions became organized and grew in size. In 1833, John C. Calhoun issued the American Ordinance of Secession, which described that the American colonists should have self-rule, because they themselves comprised the colonies, not the British king or Parliament. When Calhoun was arrested for treason in 1860, rebels who detested the invasive power of the British used Calhoun's ordinance to gather support for a revolution. They joined forces with the North, which was still angry about British influence in the slave trade, from which they had been making a great profit. Together, they wrote the Constitution of the States of America, which was signed by 100 men from every colony. By January of 1862, the first shots were fired by American troops to British forces. The war was difficult on both Britain and the American colonists, but the French soon saw potential in an American ally and began to provide support by the year 1864. By 1870, the war was over, and America gained independence in the Peace of Paris in 1871. The Constitution, written by the revolutionaries, closely mirrored that of the original Founding Fathers, in which there would be three sections of government: a judiciary, executive, and legislative branch, which would use checks and balances to ensure equality of power. Because slavery was becoming a basis of the northern trade economy and southern agricultural economy, it was maintained as an institution in the newly formed country. It was not until 1917, when American involvement in World War I, that slavery was finally ended because of both international and domestic pressures. The NAACP formed in 1933 in order to gain African American rights. However, little could be accomplished in American society. Progress of civil rights was limited because America's military was rarely focused on other nations. Rather, it was mainly focused on maintaining the status quo between races. American international intervention was very limited throughout history. American foreign policy was established by the first president of the United States, Ulysses Simpson Grant, who was chosen because of his military success in the Second Revolutionary War. He wanted the United States to enter a period of isolationism in order to recover both economically and industrially after the war. Thus, he issued the Grant Doctrine, which stated that the United States would not get involved in foreign affairs until a direct attack against the country's own security. Thus, it was not until America's safety was directly attacked by outside forces that it entered World War I in 1917. Throughout the 1900s, America attempted to uphold the Grant Doctrine in all of its foreign policies. Trade began to grow between European countries and America, such as Britain, France, Spain, Germany, and various Latin American countries. After World War I, America entered an isolationistic period. During the rise of communism in the 1950s, many Americans saw a threat to their way of life and argued that immediate action needed to be taken. Senators such as Joseph McCarthy demanded that to ensure the security of the nation, communism had to be put down. Others, however, who were labeled the Red Devils by McCarthy followers, did not see a direct threat in communistic ideals. Eventually, the President Stevenson, a Democrat who won in the election of 1952, sided with the Red Devils and argued that because communism was not a direct military threat to American security, America did not have the right to intervene. Because of Stevenson's declaration, America refrained from becoming involved with Russia, Cuba, China, Vietnam, and Korea. In 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, the NAACP finally found a case to argue for civil rights. An African-American woman's husband was killed in the World Trade Center. However, she was denied any monetary support because she was not a voting citizen. In 2003, the case of Maori versus the United States of America finally reached the Supreme Court, where it was ruled that the African Americans could have the same voting rights as white Americans. This was supported by the Civil Rights Act of 2003, which protected the voting and civil rights of African Americans. Also in 2003, many argued that an invasion in Iraq was necessary to protect the United States from further terrorist attacks after 9/11. However, President George W. Bush sent a letter to Congress arguing, as Stevens did in 1953, that it was not necessary to invade Iraq, as it did not pose a direct military threat to the United States, unlike Afghanistan. After the colony's loss in the American Revolution, Britain retained control of the Oregon Territory. Because of America's passive foreign policy throughout the years, it never fought to regain the land. However, in 2008, Oregon became the 50th addition to the United States after President McCain paid British Prime Minister $200 million for the land. In conclusion, the promotion of Benedict Arnold to Major General in February of 1777 resulted in the loss of the American Revolution and a continuation of the American colonies for another century. America's fight for independence began when the institution of slavery was jeopardized, and when America was finally free from Britain, it made slavery a permanent institution until World War I. This led to the delay in the Civil Rights Act until a Supreme Court case declared segregation unconstitutional in 2003. America's foreign policy was also greatly affected by the delay in independence. Because of the passivity established by the Grant Doctrine, America stayed out of every war it could, unless it was directly attacked by another country. Its lack of aggression led to the absence of the Cold War and wars of Vietnam and Korea. In 2003, President Bush argued against the invasion of Iraq, which greatly influences our lives today in 2011 and our involvement in the Middle East. Thus, the promotion of Benedict Arnold would have had an enormous impact on our country, both in a social sense and in our foreign policy.